Hi, my name is Jason. You might be watching this video because I read an article you wrote about recreation therapy, or something I think could be related to recreation therapy. I'd like to get your input about designing an experiment to test whether a system can help individuals cope with uncertainty about accessing recreation therapy and stay hopeful and determined to get it, even if it is too far away at a time and they may not be able to access it soon enough. I will describe and then show what the system does until the time shown below, and then briefly describe a psychological mechanism, 2 dependent variables, and 6 control conditions. Before I show how the electronic system works, I hope it will become clear why the closest thing I know how to compare the system to is a red alert system. When using the red alert system, when things get worse, the wavelength of light increases, which it can do until it becomes red. And when they get less worse, the wavelength, by decreasing, does the opposite, which it can do until it becomes blue. In the system I will show, instead of using wavelengths, angles and the number of lights that are on are used. Smaller angles and more lights being on mean that individuals are more hopeful about getting recreation therapy. Larger angles and less lights being on mean that individuals are less. However, just like people could have agreed that red is better than blue, people could agree that larger angles and less lights being on are better, but suppose they haven't agreed on that in this case. Instead of calling it the red alert system or the large wavelength alert system, I call it the large angle alert system. If before I show the lights, it doesn't make sense to define larger angles as those that are made when part of a dance costume leans points clockwise, counterclockwise, less towards where recreation therapy is, are smaller angles as those that are made when part of it leans points clockwise, counterclockwise, more towards where it is. Please consider different types of coordination, such as how angles can be made from 2 points on a dancer's costume and a third point on one. Their costume, 2, their dance partner's costume, 3, where the edge of the dance floor is closest, 4, where the dance judges are, or 5, where someone significant in the audience is sitting. Angles can be small even if it is miles away. If the costume can be called the hope compass, to describe it better, it might be helpful to compare it to what a moral compass is, not only because making recreation therapy accessible is moral, but also because both are compasses, even though one is a metaphor. The light could be all over the costume and even on a dance floor. So if I look at how many lights on part of an oversimplified costume, which is oversimplified because it is only covering my forearm, or on, I move and the number of lights that are on increases by 1 or more, like this. The angle became smaller, and now that I know how to increase the number of lights that are on by making the angle smaller, if I remember enough about how I move to be orientated, if I want to show I am more hopeful, I can make the angle even smaller. Like this. However, after the number of lights that are on increased by 1 or more, like this, if I want to show I am less hopeful, because making the angle larger involves doing the opposite of making it smaller, I can make the angle larger. Like this. In the same way, if I look at how many lights are on, I move, and the number of lights that are on decreases by one or more, like this, the angle became larger, which lets me know how to make it larger and smaller. So if I want to show I am less hopeful, I can make the angle even larger. Like this. However, after the number of lights that are on decreased by one or more, like this, if I want to show I am more hopeful, I can make the angle smaller. Like this. In addition to showing how hopeful I am while I dance, a short dance could show, as well as my memory lets me, how hopeful I was at different times during the week month that just passed, or during the campaign, which might not have ended, to make the therapy accessible with help from audiences. In addition to more lights being on, some of the lights that are on could 1. Flash more often on part of the costume that is closer to where the recreation therapy is, 2. Be denser where they flash more often, and 3. Change color more where they are denser, and do the opposite when fewer lights are on. And, I'm guessing, the way dancers move artistically could also express how hopeful they are, or aren't. The psychological mechanism I'm proposing might work by dancers knowing what it looks like to make an angle, whether it is made or not made, and knowing what movement to make that angle feels like, whether it is made or not made, and that angle meaning they are more hopeful. So they know what it looks like to, and feels like to be more hopeful, even if their dance ends with all lights off. What the angles and lights stand for would be explained to participants in the treatment condition only, if that is blind enough. Two dependent variables, which are related to how hopeful participants are, could have to do with how hopeful participants indicate they are about getting the therapy, on a scale in which 0 means not hopeful at all, and 10 means extremely hopeful, and, after watching it for 20 seconds, how much longer participants want to watch a video of this costume being worn in a dance, with 0 seconds being the least amount of time and perhaps 45 seconds being the most. To improve validity, by making it so the same thing is counted in seconds for the dependent variable that comes from watching dance, all participants could watch the same video of one person dancing instead of different people dancing for different participants. That way, something that has to do with this type of dance might be more likely to be counted rather than something else, such as how athletic different dancers are or how different stages look. There could be 6 control conditions, including 1. 0 degrees is in the direction of where the recreation therapy is. Participants aren't informed there might be something significant, such as therapy, in the direction of 0 degrees, and participants are told something, which isn't significant, is in the direction of 0 degrees. 2, the same as that, except that 0 degrees is calibrated to be less more towards participants. 3, the same as that, except that participants aren't told anything about what is in directions. 4, lights change by doing random things. 5, all lights stay on, and 6, all lights stay off. As written in the description below, to make it easier to contrast a treatment condition to control conditions by eliminating extraneous variables, such as athleticism, with the exception of what defines the treatment condition as different from the control conditions, what the label, which the independent variable equals in the treatment condition stands for, and what the label, which the independent variable equals in a control condition stands for, could be as inactive and are as similar to each other as possible, which could involve both standing for all lights being off at the end of a dance. when the independent variable equals the same label, because of the condition participants are in, to make it so that label stands for only one thing, by eliminating extraneous variables, instead of different people dancing for the independent variable of the condition when there are different participants, which might make it so the dances are not the same as each other, only one of 7 dance videos, one for the treatment condition, plus 6 for each of the 6 control conditions described earlier, for a total of 7 dance videos, could be used in each condition to show a person dancing for the independent variable. Please send your input to my email address, jason@dancingforlocations.org, which is also written near the bottom of the description. In addition to being about hope, a dance could be about effort, such as how much effort one or more dancers put into the dance to get an audience to volunteer time and or donate money to where the angle is towards, such as where a nonprofit does work or where there is any type of disaster. That effort might be another way to make people feel less disorientated, less separate from those who are struck by the disaster, and united with people anywhere in the world. 1, who are dancing about the same thing. 2, whose location could be represented on a map. 3, who they could learn about. And 4, who they could communicate with. Can a dance about hopelessness make the red alert system seem more important or add meaning to it? In addition to being about effort, a dance could be informative about where gift cards can be used after they are given away as prizes to randomly selected people in an audience who could be customers of who had the dance organized after the end of their dance. A representation of and the name of the business where the gift cards can be used could appear on a map on a computer screen the audience can see. Once the angles are used to make enough arrows raise on that map that start from where they are dancing and go near enough to where the name and representation will appear as a surprise a little before the end of the dance. I'll repeat part of this. So if I look at how many lights on part of an oversimplified costume, which is oversimplified because it is only covering my forearm, are on, I move, and the number of lights that are on increases by 1 or more, like this. The angle became smaller, and now that I know how to increase the number of lights that are on by making the angle smaller, if I remember enough about how I move to be orientated, if I want to show I am more hopeful, I can make the angle even smaller. Like this. However, after the number of lights that are on increased by 1 or more, like this, if I want to show I am less hopeful, because making the angle larger involves doing the opposite of making it smaller, I can make the angle larger. Like this. In the same way, if I look at how many lights are on, I move, and the number of lights that are on decreases by 1 or more, like this, the angle became larger, which lets me know how to make it larger and smaller. So if I want to show I am less hopeful, I can make the angle even larger. like this. However, after the number of lights that are on decreased by one or more, like this, if I want to show I am more hopeful, I can make the angle smaller. Like this.